I'll speak about it in two ways. One is the aspect, the the interpersonal aspect itself between the couple, and second, the couple's relationship with the society. So that's how I thought about this when you were asking us. So I watched a Tamil movie. Now I don't remember the name, but the very first scene was extremely powerful and I'll say disturbing. So it is a scene where a couple, a heterosexual couple, is in a room, in a closed room. So it's clearly an intimate space. The girl is shown to belong to a caste that prepares instruments made out of hide. So it's known to be a caste which is usually a scheduled caste. And the boy is shown to be non-scheduled caste or scheduled tribe, meaning he could be Savarna. So there is this scene where they're fighting or bickering about something, and he's annoyed with her, and then she starts drumming the side of the bed, right? In fun, and then makes jest out of the situation. And his immediate response to that is, "Oh, you don't change," right? So that's a very simple statement to say. But if you consider the politics in that room at that point in time, considering her caste, her background, and then what that meant to say that to her, there's so much politics in that. Right? So, one, in terms of speaking about violence and love itself in that interpersonal space, I think there is so much violence, irrespective of all the love that is there in a relationship. So, as a part of Running Legal Trust's work, what we do is we deal with cases of domestic violence, and our primary audience, I would say, beneficiaries, or whatever you call it, are women who are victims of violence. And every single time it is the same story. I absolutely loved him, I got married to him, but the very next day, he put me black and blue, I was in the police station. Right? And then when we ask her, what do you want out of this whole thing? No, please don't harm him, but just, give a humbly so that at least he comes back to me. I still love him that much. I mean, my colleagues sitting here will testify to that fact. But we deal with this dilemma every day. So that there's so much politics even in that interpersonal space, in that very, very intimate relationship, which is so powerful. That's also a relationship of power, of whatever, gender, definitely, if it's heterosexual or even homosexual for that matter. Caste, 100%. Religion, most definitely. So, these are eye-opening situations for me every single day, although I've been doing this for 10 years now. Every time the woman comes to us and says, "Oh, I'm a victim of violence, what do you want? I want my husband back." That still is a, oh my God situation, but we of course have to do what she wants. We have to give her what she wants at the end of the day. So, I would say the relationship between love and violence in that interpersonal space is extremely intimate, very inextricably connected. Right? And to speak about the other side, which is the other part, which is the relationship between the couple and the society itself, I think now that love is seen to be political, or rather love is very, very deeply political, as Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said, there is this whole, everything that the couple is doing is seen as a political act. So even in intercaste marriage, for that matter, suppose I fall in love with a boy who does not belong to my caste, and yet we get married, that itself is a statement that we're making in the whole current scenario. So there also what I feel is honor killing, since you brought it up. The relationship between love and violence there, again, very inextricably bound. However, I would say love is very vulnerable to that violence. Love is extremely vulnerable because you do not know whether you'll get killed tomorrow. Now, the tragedy of the situation is that if you look at NCRB data on honor killings, there is no specific section saying honor killings. It just says murder, rape, etc., all the crimes that list out. But there is no heading called honor killings. So that means it is not a specific crime at all. It's like saying raping a non-Savarna woman, raping a Dalit woman, and raping a Savarna woman are on the same level, which it is not. Of course, rape is an extremely agonizing and traumatizing act for any woman for that matter. There is no comparing it there at all. But one must take into account the intersectionality, and hence the whole concept of honor killings not being a special crime in itself is a huge, I would say, danger to the society itself. So one, irrespective of however educated a woman is, however urban she is, however liberal her parents are, there's always this aspect of seeking permission, trying not to hurt them, trying to be a good daughter, and all of them are reinforced by the serials we watch, the movies we watch, and conversations around us. I sometimes feel bad that some of us are in a bubble, because I know Arvind thinks in a certain way about a certain topic, and I do resonate with lots of things he says. But if I were to speak to my family friend who was on the same WhatsApp group as me, oh, we are poles apart. So even in the aspect of love, right, like love marriage for that matter, extremely political act. And imagine an intercaste or inter-religious marriage in the context of love jihad or any other created notion. We are in very dangerous times. So I would say between the couple itself, the relationship is extremely intimate of violence and love. And intercede the couple and the society, I would say that love is vulnerable to it. Exactly why it should be fighting back as it is. Because if love is such a threat to the society, and in fact if the society is saying love is a huge threat, I mean, then love is doing great. So with that I will end.
Yeah, I completely agree with it, and I think that every point that you made is something very resonating and very eye-opening. So it is something we just grown up hearing. We are conditioned in certain manner that women are meant to feel vulnerable, and there is always a implied fear of abandonment in them. Like, what if this will happen? And this is something which will make them go through it, no matter how educated woman is. And I think the point of intersectionality that you have made, it is very important to bring it in every aspect that we are studying, we are talking, because I think there is no feminism without intersectionality. There is nothing without intersectionality per se, because every person goes through certain different zones because of the societal conditions that they are putting in. So yes, thank you, Ashwini, for putting this point. So yes, I look forward to listening to you.
Yeah, no, I think the question, right, what is the link between love and violence, takes up to, I think, Ashwini's really wonderful answer as to why it's an important issue. I don't know if you all have heard this, but the one criticism you get in radical circles, if you talk about, say, the right to love, is it's a bourgeois right. And saying that, it's something which maybe people in middle class settings, etc., who have a family and a home can talk about. It's not something, say, poor people who are in very difficult circumstances really want. And that's what we realized over the course of our work, is that's a big mistake. Because you'll see that, regardless of the circumstances people are in, people really aspire to establish these bonds of love, as it were. And why I think the framing is important is what Naina is basically telling us, is that the right to love is a deeply, and Ashwini of course just told us, is a deeply political issue, right? And it's a political issue in what sense? It's a political issue in the sense that's linked to the question of the maintenance of the existing society, and love, in Ashwini's telling, challenges the structure of society. Again, you go back to the question of what Ashwini put forward, is go back to Dr. Baker's annihilation of caste. The phrasing he uses is, how do you annihilate caste? We ask the question. There's one line where he says, when blood begins to mix with blood, that's the beginning point of the question of the annihilation of caste. Right? So the idea that put it this way, right? We all grow up within certain social, political structures we work very much within those structures. But the importance of love, I think, is it can challenge that structure. That is, you believe very strongly in the imperative caste, but then you fall in love with somebody who is from a different caste background, right? And that's something which is, again, it's not respectable within the norms of your society. It's not something you should be doing as far as what society tells you, but something you can't control, something which is beyond your control, as it were. And that beyond your control is where the possibility or the potentiality of love as a challenge to existing structures exists. And the question of violence again, right? One is, of course, the question of violence by society, right from families, which again Ashwini spoke about, which is families which can't tolerate boys and girls loving outside frameworks of both caste and religion. Again, there's a range of documentation on this, where the source of violence or the imperative of violence against inter-caste or inter-religious couples comes from families. And that's such a, we think of it as such a almost counterintuitive opinion. Families are the ones which are bound to you by relationship of love. But the fact that through your love, you threaten the institution of caste or the institution of religion means that you don't even mind killing you for the sake of the honor, of the so-called honor of the family. That's one kind of a structure of violence. But the other structure of violence is the violence of the law. The violence of the law in terms of, in particular, we haven't talked about, but I've talked about many times, is section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, where what does it basically say, right? If you look at it, the law, of course, says it criminalizes what it calls carnal intercourse against the order of nature. But in effect, what it is doing is it is telling you that you can't love outside the boundaries of heterosexuality. Right? So the structure of heterosexuality is kept in place by the law such as section 376. Right? So the violence is there both in law, violence is there in society. The hope is really there in the idea of love. Right? The hope is there in love because love challenges these structures. Again, what is so interesting to me is often you think of resistance coming really from people who are politicized, right? Ashwini is a part of a group, we're a part of a group. People who come and join this group end up thinking in a certain way, and therefore they all think, as you rightly put it, in a certain way. But the point about love, I think, is it's not confined to those who think in a political kind of way. It comes from an emotion which can sometimes escape the confines or the boundaries of what the social order prescribes as far as you are concerned. And that's where its potentiality lies. And that's where I think the importance of love lies. And that's where I think there's a need to think of the politics of love, which is the point that you're putting forward. And which is why I think, that is, I personally think, that the right to love is a very important right in terms of challenging the structures of caste, challenging the structures of religion, as well as challenging the structures of patriarchy and gender as well.
Thank you, Arpan, for putting it out there. And I think it is very important. And I think we should have, our constitution do provide us the right to love freely. But I think the constraints which is putting up is creating a lot of angles to it. And though love is always in political act that both of you have mentioned. So I think with this I take forward the.
Yeah, sure,
Yes.
sure. I'd like to stick to, the love for the inanimate part which I began with. What I've been thinking of, how talking of love and violence, haven't most wars been rooted in a love for one's own country, and which with the narrow perspective of your own country and not a fellow human being. Right? And what really shook me was what's been playing out around us in the past few months. When was the last time you saw a military operation having a logo, a hashtag, and it's been running for months, and finally it ends up as a mark to show your love for the country. You're asked to display it as your display picture, and it is seen as a love for your country if you support a particular military operation. And finally, what really shook me was it has ended up on the official invitation to the National Independence Day celebration at Red Fort, where you have the logo of a military operation and showing that it's generally Independence Day is when you show all your, it's an outpouring of love for your country. That's how it's largely seen. And now you introduce a logo of a military operation, where a violent military operation, whether, let's not go into whether it was justified or whether it was retaliatory. That's a different perspective. But from when has this love for your country been linked to something like this, right? And what is labeled as a counter-terrorism operation. So that's a perspective of love which unsettles me, because it's nothing but rooted in violence rather than love. So that seems more like mindless love.
Yeah, I think you have put a very good point, because the certain line of love for patriotism and love for nationalism has like a very big purpose, which needs to be maintained and needs to be seen from their activity. So yes, so moving ahead to the next question. So it's like again, so if we think like of love as a aspect of freedom that all of us completely need, what does the freedom look like to you? Maybe from the personal and political lens both. And what would it take for all of us to live in that freedom? Because considering why I mentioned all of us to live in that freedom, because how many years of independence we have traveled, still it is the question that how it looks for all of us to live in that, because all of us are not in that same freedom. Yes.
Freedom to go first, yeah. When the question of love and freedom is put by Naina, I think there's a book by Eric Fromm where he talks about the idea of linking love and freedom. Right? And the idea again of love is, to me at least, it's a form of human connection. Right? And what is the importance of a human connection? And here you can go back to the idea that a human connection with another person is one way in which you enhance your own sense of what it is to live. There's a way in which you give a greater meaning to your life through that form of connection. Right? So the idea of freedom, again, I don't think freedom should be seen as in a purely negative sense. As in, freedom is my idea to live without constraint. Right? That's one notion of a liberal idea of freedom, where the idea of freedom is there are no constraints on my action or my behavior or what I do. But I think the other equally important thing is, how does freedom contribute to a development of a sense of who you are? How is freedom a part of a certain kind of growth or a development which people go through? Right? And that's where the idea of human connection, the human bonding becomes, I think, very important. Maybe I'll link it up to, again, a framework which I found very, very useful actually. If anybody has a chance to read Hannah Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism, she has a very beautiful distinction, since some of you, I think, are from a philosophy context, right? Distinction between what she calls isolation, loneliness, and solitude. By isolation, what she means, she says every totalitarian regime wants you to live in a state of isolation. That is, I am alone, Ashwini is alone, Vinay is alone, we've never connected to each other. We all think that the current status quo is completely unacceptable, right? But we don't think we can do anything about it, because, what can I do? What can I do or say which will change anything whatsoever? Right? So that state of mind is very important for a totalitarian regime to foster or to cultivate. So you, in a sense, what your imperative is to break that sense of isolation by forming a sense of community, a sense of bond between, say, at this case, four of us, yeah, to form that bond between four of us. So we believe that we can change the world that we live in. So that's a very, very important dimension of love, if you think of it as a form of human connection. The second reason why I think love would be important is the notion of what Arendt calls the idea of loneliness. And she says loneliness is the disease of the 20th century. I assume we can very easily argue that loneliness is equally the disease of the 21st century. And possibly social media even furthers the sense of loneliness we have from each other. Right? And by loneliness, what she means is you're in the middle of a crowd, in the middle of this is a crowd over here, but yet you don't feel connected to anybody around you. Right? There's a certain kind of complete disconnection you feel from the world around you. Right? And that's a kind of almost the existential loneliness, where you don't feel that ability to connect to the world around you at all. And that's a very, I think, horrible place to be. Right? So again, if you think of love, or you think of these forms of connection which we have, that's a way in which you challenge, fundamentally, loneliness. But the third notion which she references is the idea of what she calls solitude. And solitude, she says, is a state where you feel, though you're in the middle, though you're possibly like Mr. Thoreau, living on Warden Pond, right? You still feel a deep connection to the world around you. Right? And so it's a way in which you feel connected to the world in spite of the fact that there are no people around you. So that's a state. So in effect, right, what you want to do is you should be able to challenge the question of isolation, to be able to combat the sense of loneliness, and you to cultivate the inner space with a sense of solitude. Because if you don't have the sense of solitude, I think you won't be able to form connections with human beings, right? And so that's also very, very important. Though we think we're with people around us all the time, if you can't connect with people at a deeper level, then we're missing something as well. And possibly, social media is something which inhibits that possibility of human connection. Right? So I think that's
I think that's a wonderful point that you have made about the loneliness aspect, and I think we need to study it more coherently from the different arenas. So yes, I think Ashwini can add more into it.
I'm just going to bring up an anecdote from the time when I was interviewing Arvind and asking him a few questions post the Supreme Court's decision on 377 and several other decisions. And my question to him was what according to you is love, I think, or maybe he just digressed into that aspect, I do not remember. But very, very beautifully he said, to live is to love. Am I paraphrasing you? Okay, so basically he equated love and life. And I was extremely moved by that answer, so I cannot copy it here, that's the thing. but I didn't want to bring it up here because I thought that was a very powerful statement, that or powerful thought, especially in that context of the Supreme Court decision, which didn't go really well for the LGBT community at that point in time. So with that I'll come to what I would see as a society with freedom and love. So I would say to love anyone without being judged. I know that's as cliched as it sounds, but okay, I will also bring in a personal anecdote, which is I had an intercaste marriage, and that was extremely tough to do because it was between a Savarna and a non-Savarna, right? And so much resistance, so much, I'll say mental trauma for both of us, more to him than me. But finally what we did do is a mantra mangalya. I don't know if many of the people here, being very young, know about it. But mantra mangalya was a concept, I think Akhil can add later on during our informal interactions because he knows this really well. But mantra mangalya was a concept formulated by Kuvempu, who is one of the greatest poets that Karnataka has seen. And what he said is, he basically created this whole form of marriage where there's no priest, there are no rituals, there are no ceremonies, there is no language that neither of the parties or any of the parties understand. And it's just a simple stand there, call a few loved ones, say a few vows, and have good food, go home. Right? And so we did a mantra mangalya. Although it was very easy for me to do it because my parents are largely liberal. So I'm not, okay, I remove the quotes, they're largely liberal. So it was extremely tough for my partner to do it because he came from a certain background, a certain conservative mindset, I would say. So I think that was an extremely powerful thing for both of us to do personally. It's not that we wanted to go set some example, show the world what we're doing. Absolutely not. It was just that we wanted to abhor all the tradition that comes with irrationality and just have a very simple, beautiful evening where we say what we want to do for each other and end it right there. So with that, what I want to say is what I imagine is the freedom to actually be who you are, and in fact the freedom to be the best of yourself, which your partner must, I mean the onus is on a partner to ensure that you are your best with them, and of course it's also on you. But I would say self-development in that beautiful relationship, I would say is the ideal situation for freedom and love.
This is a very powerful anecdote that you have shared, and I completely like it. And like wonderfully, Arvind has said that to love is to live. So yes, I think to live is to love. So I think this is a very powerful move too. And like as you have mentioned, there's a Hindi poet who has once Sarveshwar Dayal, who has once told that if you love someone, to be with someone, it's same equivalent to be in love if you can live alone with someone in that sense. So if you are having this sense of your individuality, your own self-respect, and you are still be with the same person in that same coherence. So I think that is the most freeing act of loving someone. So yes, thank you so much Ashwini for sharing it.
Yeah, so freedom, again, talk about the Constitution, and when it was being made, people spoke about what is the purpose of this Constitution, and then it trickles down to what is the purpose of life in one of the debates. And there comes the pursuit of happiness. So one of the one of the ideas that is put forth is that will this Constitution support the pursuit of happiness? And then there's a lot of debate about freedoms and reflection on the past colonial regime that we are now letting go. But what would be the freedom of the future? Freedoms in the future is the kind of questions. So now, when I look back to connect that to these are, mind you, these are freedom fighters who gave their lives in blood, sweat for getting rid of the shackles of colonialism, and cutting to just the recent past, where how these thoughts have affected me. It's particularly this. Whenever I heard the national anthem, it would evoke some deep emotion in me, and I've always invariably teared up. But in the recent past, that is stopped. And amongst one of the things was that I felt that I don't have the freedom to love my country the way I want. When this Constitution and this society allowed for rules which made it mandatory for you to stand up for a national anthem, particularly before a movie screen. How could you tell me how to love my country? Well, isn't it my country, and can I not express my love for my country in the way that don't I have that freedom? Isn't this the kind of freedom that we all, the freedom fighters, debated about and fought for and debated? So, so this sense of loss of freedom to love my country has changed my what the national anthem does to me. I don't know if it's a permanent change or what, but this is a change I noticed. It doesn't evoke the same emotion as it used to do sometime in the past. So yeah, I see this as a curtailing of my freedom.
I think like you have made a wonderful point, because like as Tagore said, like your mind is without fear. But we have started penetrating that fear that, oh, if you're standing up for the national anthem, you love your country, and if you're not doing so, you don't love your country. So there's a constant fear for people to do certain actions. So I think that the freedom to pursue what you want to do in the name of love, it is something, again, act of revolt, I could rather say.
And there have been examples where people have been beaten up they've been violent. It has gotten ugly and violent when people did not stand up for it. So I think all of that had shook me somewhat.
Yeah, I think
So yeah, so
it's a
that's
wonderful point.
yeah. So it can get love, can get violent in this way too.
But just to maybe make correct 2 points which both of them made, right? Ashwini made a very important point. I guess all of you have got it, which is in her, the way she put it, the idea of love for her is a process through which one becomes a better person, right? Through the act of love, you become a better person. Again, I just want to give a little context to that actually really wonderful idea. If those who haven't read it, if you want to read something on love, I would recommend please read Plato's Symposium. Right? I'm not joking. I'm not saying it as a superficial point, but it's a really wonderful, wonderful book because what it does is the conversation is 7 people gathered around a table and table or room, and symposium apparently means drinking party. They're all drinking, and the imperative is everybody has to make a speech on love. So Aristophanes begins the entire process, and he says that the way he puts it, in a time before time, human beings were not men or women, right? They had the one kind of human being on which all of them had 4 legs, 4 arms, and 2 heads, and they were joined like this, right? 2 sides men, sorry, both sides, 2 sides men, 2 sides women, 1 side man, 1 side woman. These were the kind of beings they were. They were like balls full of themselves, right? So apparently these creatures didn't pay any attention to Zeus. So Zeus said, they're really arrogant, what do I do? So he splits them in half, right? And according to Aristophanes, that's when the idea of love was born. That is when you're looking for your other half for the rest of your life. Why this is an important point, the only reason it's important is because there's no judgmentality here, right? One kind of being is both sides woman, one kind of being is one side man, one side woman, the other kind of being is both sides man, right? So it doesn't matter if you love a man or a woman. What matters is the intensity of the passion. And the intensity of the passion comes from the fact that you were split at that time. That's one kind of a story, right? Then the next story is by Socrates, and he puts forward the idea that for him, that he believes that for him, he says that initially you're in love with the idea of one person, right? But then we know that over a period of time, what you love in the person may not be there anymore. That is, the person gets a little older, may not be as beautiful. Certain characteristics you thought were charming become very difficult to deal with, etc. So you fall out of love with the person. So which means love is perishable, right? So Socrates' point is no, that can't be your idea of love. You must be in love with the idea of love, right? With certain kind of ideal notion, not just the physical aspect. Then you move from the idea of love to the idea of justice. So that's where Vinay comes in. Because his idea, he doesn't believe in the idea of love of human being. As he told you, not a single human being did he mention. He's in love with the idea of justice. In the most abstract kind of formula. Right? So that's Vinay is in this case Socrates. That's his idea. His love is linked to justice. But then this is going on, and then suddenly into the room walks Alcibiades. Alcibiades has a laurel wreath in his hand. He's apparently the most beautiful man in Rome at that time, and Greece at that time. And he says, "I'm sorry for interrupting your party." They tell him that it's fine. You joined a party. Now you make a speech on love. He says, "See, I can't make any speech on love, but I can tell you about why I love Socrates." And he says, "I am the most beautiful man in Rome. Socrates is the most ugly man, right? In Greece. But I really, really love him because he helps me become a better human being." Right? So that's related to Ashwini's notion, which is the idea of love. At the end of the day, it's not based on beauty, which is a perishable point. It's really based on the fact of how, through that act of love, you become a better human being. Right? And so that's the imperative which it ends with. And finally, of course, Plato doesn't tell us what is the idea of love. It ends with that notion of these 5 ideas are in play. You don't know which is the idea. So I'm not saying Mira's idea is the right idea, but it's her idea.
It's one idea. Oh, I completely agree, and thank you Arvind for this wonderful analogical explanation of it. But yes, and with this, I want to include with one line that Bellux one mentioned that while saying it, that I don't love you for the person you are. I love you for the person I become come when I'm with you. So I think that is the notion of love and freedom that you are trying to put it out. So yes, it's a wonderful point. Thank you for the story also. So yes, moving on to the last question. So if love has been a form of resistance, so we are moving to the last part of our panel, which is resistance. How do we sustain the resistance in the face of growing hostility? Though all of you have answered it in certain different manner, but what do you think it will take culturally, politically, constitutionally to keep love alive as an act of defiance? Like, what is something we can take up ahead from this room?
Ah, well, okay. So, I think you would have guessed by now how disillusioned I might have been with love for fellow beings in that way. But of course, I go back again to the making of our constitution, where people were debating about, since we're talking about love and how the intersectionality of love, caste and religion is there to be seen, and as much as we don't hear of it, it ought to be spoken more. We might hear it in academic discourse or in newspaper, but when it comes to reality, like how Ashwini spoke of her own relatives and extended family, I do have similar issues talking these aspects with people at home. You know, the makers of our constitution did debate about the idea of, you know, love, and one aspect of violence in the recent past is this idea of conversion, need for conversion if you have to marry someone. And this whole freedom to convert or freedom to practice a religion was well debated. And one of the aspects that T.T. Krishnamacharya particularly brings out says that, you know, why are people willing to give up their religion? What is the root of it? It is caste. What this caste-based segregation has done is created this hierarchy, and it is an emancipation for them, a path to emancipation from this. And so they seek to convert to different religions. This was particularly when people were complaining that if there is freedom to convert, right, whether freedom of religion means that there is freedom to convert to a religion outside the one that you're born. So he says, I am particularly, there's talk of Christianity, where, you know, Christians end up converting, was one of the ideas that comes along. So he says, I've been part of Christian, I've grown up in Christian institutions. For 14 years I've studied in all these institutions. Not once has anybody attempted to convert me. And this, the ethos that this religion has brought in, and has shaped me. And similarly has shaped so many other people. So, and when I see others converting, so I think he is, it is based on false, that there is no basis to saying that anybody who goes to a Christian institute will be converted. And then he says, look at why people are converting. It's the problem with you people, where your religion, which has a caste-based segregation, is forcing others to let go of their religion and go to another religion. So again, so this is inextricably, I would say, inextricably linked to love, and by way of how religion comes in way of love these days. Despite these ideas having, it's been more than 75 years since all these ideas were debated and thoughtfully introduced in the constitution. It may be there in letter, but in spirit it is found missing. And unless we find ways to practice and help others practice, it won't be kept alive. I don't see the constitution lacking in letter to be able to expand our freedoms and practice love as we wish. It is beyond the letter, where in spirit, but it is severely lacking, and that can only come from each of us, how we can expand our perspectives and help each other practice what the constitution offers.
So I think with this idea that like I told Vinay is putting up strict I guess, but I think this is something we have completely formulated on something with a better grounds to move forward to it. And yes, I hope the spirit of hope that you have mentioned, we take it ahead outside this room.
Correct me from where Vinay left off actually. I wasn't meaning to criticize him.
No,
I was actually meaning to support what he's saying in the sense that, you know, it's a very important point actually. When you think of love, right, it can sometimes be seen as a very privatizing emotion, right? I mean, what we all know in an experience, we're hanging out with some really good friends and suddenly they fall in love and after that you never see them. Because they disappear into the one-to-one relationship and that's it. You never see them ever again, right? So the critique, I think very important critique of the idea of love. Actually it's a very privatizing emotion. Actually it's very much a part of the capitalist economy. Actually there's nothing it contributes to anything larger as far as the world is concerned. Because once you're in love, that's the end of that person. We never see the person ever again. In terms of the my ideas of, you know, of forming community, forming societies, forming groups, where people. Lovers all disappeared. They don't exist. They're only there for themselves. You support them, they're there, they're not there. That's one kind of a critique, right? Which is why the idea of, you know, of a broader notion of love, I think is very, very important. Because I think what Vinay has been consistently making the point throughout is the point that we need to have a broader idea of love. You can't go on with this idea of, you know, romantic love and that be all in the end. It's very important. It's not the only thing, it's his consistent point, right? And then I'll link it up to one last point, again, the point which he made, which is when the US Constitution has a preamble which refers to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And there's a lot of debate, which I recently found is always there, on what does the pursuit of happiness mean. You go to, again, Hannah Arendt, right? And a book on revolution. She makes the point that the happiness the founders of the US Constitution imagined, one part of it was the private domain, which is the idea that I go into my house, I'm with my family, and I have cups of tea with people, etc., and that's happiness. That's one dimension of happiness. But then her consistent point is there's a public dimension to happiness as well. People are truly and really happy when you're actually involved in the communities and the societies you're a part of. Right? And it's a very important dimension of happiness as well. So in a sense, I think the work which both Ashwini and Vinay are doing is really about the idea of happiness as having a public dimension, as love as having a public dimension, drawing from the personal and the private to make it larger, public and political. So I think that's where the idea of love as resistance can come in a larger way. And it's up to all of us to take forward that broader idea of public happiness, to the idea of love as a form of commitment to change the world that we live in. Again, going back to Arendt, since she's my favorite thinker as of now, she has her biography is called For Love of the World. Right? It's a beautiful way of putting it. Right? I mean, how do you love the world? And again, you think of a range of poets, right? They're able to articulate that idea of a love of the world. Again, the other poet, if you get a chance, please read, is this Turkish poet called Nazim Hikmat. Right? And so the idea of loving the world is very, very important. Again, there's a poem which he has. I'll just quote one last, which I do a little part of it, which I do remember. It's a poem called Angina Pectoris by Nazim Hikmat. Nazim Hikmat is in prison, Turkish prison for many years. And he goes to the doctor, finally, the doctor in the infirmary in the Istanbul hospital. And the doctor tells him it's angina pectoris. And then he says that the reason for my angina pectoris is not cigarettes, is not smoking, is not imprisonment, but because my heart still beats with the most distant stars. Meaning that when the Red Army is marching, it marches with them. When people are executed in Greece, it is executed with them. When some trouble happens at home, I feel the trauma equally. Right? So that's the reason why my heart is burdened. Right? And so it's very, very important to cultivate a public dimension to your love.
I think that is a wonderful aspect that you have mentioned. And I think this is something we really need to put forward to, because it reminds me of Peter Boyden, who have once said like the distinction between the public and private and how it needs to be seen from the broader aspect. So I think yes, the idea to change the world together should be the real motto of the love, not just to be get individually educated. So yes, moving
romantic. I will end with that as well by saying there has to be a movement for love, like of love, for love, whatever you call it. And I'm not saying it in a way that, oh, Valentine's Day, come, let's go. But no, but in the sense that Arvind and Vinay have been saying, in terms of the publicness of love itself. Right? And what do I mean by that? It could be very, very simple acts of, say, demolishing, I would say, conventional structures that further hatred. To demolish conventional structures that do not allow freedom to love. Right? These could be state, these could be non-state, these could be family. So I'm currently reading this book called The Anti-Social Family, right? And the whole point of that book is what is this familial setting, and how does it come into play in our personal, in our political, etc. I will in fact go a step ahead from both the speakers and say there is no personal here. Again, there's absolutely no personal here. It has to be a public, it has to be a political act, and there has to be a movement for love. It could be very, very small sets of, say, a lawyer, say, challenging the provisions of the Special Marriage Act, which mandate that a compulsory notice must be put up in the sub-registrar's office. It could be a researcher who's writing about how frivolous or non-existent love jihad as a concept is. It could be, I don't know, a woman just going up there to the court and saying, I want to invoke my restitution of conjugal rights. So it could be as solitudinal to steal, solitudinal acts as these, but not lonely definitely. But there has to be a culmination of all these things if we are to actually take several steps forward. Especially because currently there's so much hate around us. It is in fact so disillusioning actually, because my parents keep asking me how I still am so obviously romantic after all the work that we do, because every day we hear at least 5 stories of violence and 5 stories of sexual assault, whatever it is. But I mean, I'm not saying ignore and then move on with life. I'm only saying yes, these are all extremely important to build me personally as an individual, to build, say, my organization as something that deals with these cases every day. But it's also extremely important for us to take these into account and then address them one by one. There's no other way to it. Because we have to take up these cases one by one, and in fact that is what I'm calling a movement for love. Nothing else I think can help us right now.
I think that is, I completely agree with all three of you of how what you have put in about love, the act of love, and the resistance for love. And I think in that debate, I completely agree with what Ashwini, Arvind, and Vinay have put it out. But adding to Ashwini's your point, like speaking up is an act of love. Speaking up is an act of resistance, I would say, because love is a form of resistance. So yes, at the current points of whatever we are thinking, whatever we are doing, what is very important to take a first step ahead is to speak up. Speak up against anything, speak up against anything that is not so in the line of justice and fairness. So yes, with this, I would really like to thank all of you for joining me today here, for agreeing to be here, and to actually give some wonderful viewpoints and discussions, which I hope that we all of us take up these discussions outside these rooms and keep the spirit of love alive in the name of love. So yes, so we are open to questions, so we can take only 2 questions, so if any of you have any questions. Oh, yes please.
I have a question. So here we're talking a lot about love as resistance, which is one side of it. But I'm thinking of also the flip side of it, which is how people are taught to love, who people are taught to love, what people are taught to love, and how people are taught to love through life, right? And how there's sort of like this conflict and this clash between our ideas of love in this room as resistance versus people's ideas of love outside this room as conformity. So you love your community and that comes with certain forms of violence that you exhibit or perpetuate against other people. So there's also an otherization that comes with love in the way that it's traditionally taught, and how people generally understand it. So how do we sort of not reconcile, but how do you debate between these two languages of love and these different systems and ideas of love when we're all thinking about it so differently? Because I think one of you said that in this room we all agree, but as soon as it gets to WhatsApp family group, I will say something maybe about how people's ideas are very, very violent, very, very phobic in many ways. But the counter to that is always it is love for the nation, it's love for the people. So then, how do you sort of have a conversation between those kinds of two different ideas of love?
Okay. I'm thinking about it still, but then what first came to my mind is what I have realized. Like if I were to answer this question, say 10 years ago when I started my law career, I would have perhaps said go all out, smash all those people, smash all those conversations, go drill them up, and then say, look, this is what it is. The Constitution says constitutional morality, not your morality or mine. A death penalty is wrong because it's not like quenching the thirst of the nation, etc. But over time, what I've realized is that there is more value in engaging with conversations that only lead to something constructive. Now, I'm not saying, ignore and walk away. I'm only saying that I pick my battles. I think I'll only speak for myself. I pick my battles. There was a time 10 years ago when I used to counter my uncle on the WhatsApp group that literally I can show you screenshots that I have saved after that. But now I think, let him have his opinion, I will have mine, and I would rather go to a school and teach the 7th graders there about the ideas in the preamble of the Constitution of India. So I don't know, I think I would like to pick my battles, but I don't think I'd like to go bulldozer someone else who's speaking that at all. But I have realized that I have some subtle ways of going around the system and trying to put across my point. At least in the court that works very well. If there's a judge who is extremely, I think contempt of court. It just prevented me from getting arrested. If there's a judge I know is going to rule against me because of my gender, etc., I know that I'll bring in a senior counsel tomorrow who is a male, who can possibly put across the very same point that I have thought about that case and the very same legal point that I have in mind. So these are some of the ways I have tried to address this inconsistency, and there's a long way to go, but I'm still figuring it out along the way. I don't know if I answered your question at all, but this is what I try to do. Yeah.
Maybe if you want to answer.
I'll say one line.
Yeah.
Ashwini mentioned Dr. Ambedkar's notion of constitutional morality. What he says in the Constituent Assembly is constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. Our people have yet to learn it. It has to be cultivated. And democracy in India is a top dressing, the soil which is essentially undemocratic. So I think what Ashwini is indicating is you've got to cultivate constitutional morality in all the spaces that we are. And the fact that you're hosting an event like this, you realize other people also who want to cultivate a similar way of thinking. Right? So it's not easy. It's not always easy. But as Ashwini puts it, you pick your battles and you know the other people who think like you. And you have to take it forward, keeping that in mind and establishing, again, there's a philosopher Stanley Cavell talks about establishing what he calls little communities of love. There are people who think like this, and it might be small, it might be, but you have to build that. That's really what you have. And the Ashwini's idea of a movement for love, you go towards that direction.
I think, anyone have any other question? This is the last question.
I just want to give, just want to reflect what you have said. So, I have two questions. One is this call for the movement of love. It demands unlearning existing notions of love, right? And particularly the idea that love and abuse can coexist, which is what you started with victim survivors of domestic violence. It is so internalized that love and abuse can coexist, right? So any movement of love should begin the minimum requirement should be that love and abuse cannot coexist. And once that is unlearned, we can probably create space for more genuine notions of love to flourish. So maybe one thing to collectively reflect on is how do we go about doing that? Not just for ourselves, but how do we create social conditions where this coexistence of love and abuse can be, broken down. So that's something rushing me. To Arvind, I have a slightly more this question of economic question. Somehow the idea of freedom to love is seen as a non-material kind of question, right? But if you do think about it from a Marxist lens, you need certain material economic conditions to create a society where people are free to love. So it's not a hypothetical, right? Restrictions on whom to love is linked with endogamy, inheritance of property, and all these economic material conditions. So if you look at societies where property rights are looser, then the choice of partner is also more, there's also more freedom in terms of choice of partner. So there is a larger political economic question. What kind of economic conditions do produce the necessary material conditions for the freedom to live? This is something I would like Arvind to build on.
Okay, can I go first? Okay. So I will say a little bit more about the women that I'm talking about who come into our office and want to file a domestic violence case. Now, how we analyze it, and please feel free to come in, people from our office are here, my colleagues, so please feel free to come in. But most often than not, the woman wants the man back because, I'm not saying this in any other way, but he hasn't paid the school fee of the child. Or she has absolutely no money and the landlord is saying, vacate the house tomorrow, I will throw your things out otherwise. Right? And I'm not even exaggerating, you can corroborate, like other people can corroborate. Like literally tomorrow, landlord is calling and saying, Nane, Kali Madu, I will throw you out. Right? So I think the more, there could be more, internalized forms of abuse which women need to again self-explore and introspect and realize. But these overt reasons that we can find for the abuse to exist in the first place, I think empowerment of women is the key answer to that. When I say empowerment, I'm not saying it in a very fashionable way, but I mean ensuring that women are economically stable, financially are living on their own terms. Because most of the women who come to us would not come to us with a domestic violence case if maybe they had means to pay for the child's fee tomorrow. Right? So that's one small aspect. I know it's a huge, it's a very big question that you asked, but that's one small aspect. The second aspect is about the familial conditioning itself. Like the parents, so many cases are of parents telling the woman, no, you must stay in that family. Because what will people think if I say you are getting divorced? So I have women coming crying to me, literally crying to me saying, I want this marriage because my parents are saying this. So the second problem that I want to really put forward is the parents' conditioning of the woman itself. Because domestic worker who's working in my house for about 10 years, she is having a bad time with her husband right now and nobody is paying the child's fee. The husband has said, he's a government employee mind you, and he said, okay, you come back to me, come live with me, and government school is service and don't worry, fee is taken care of, you don't have to pay. This girl is a domestic worker. So that's a huge incentive for her to actually go back to him when he actually put her out in the middle of the night when she was pregnant a few years ago. Right? And then she goes back to her house saying, okay, please can I live here for a few days? I'm not able to live with my husband. And the mother apparently says, you pay for all the provisions that I'm buying to make food for you and your child. Right? So I'm not even, this is a real story. So I think I'm trying to put both these problems that I've put forward in the same story, which it is as it is. I think if we can solve these small problems, I think that is one half step forward. Now, all these manipulative men, all these manipulative instances of abuse, etc., are also there, and there are women who come to us with them, and that's another story to tell. But I think the easier answer is what I am giving right now is to tackle these societal and conditioning problems that we have today.
It's a good question, it's a great question. How is the economic structure linked to your freedom to exercise your rights? I think you're absolutely right to say that the ability to exercise your rights really depends upon the extent of economic privilege which you have. Whatever the right may be. Is it the right to access public spaces? Is it the right to love? Is it whatever the right may be? It's linked up to the economic structure. And again, go back to the closing speech of Dr. Ambedkar, the Constituent Assembly. That's the point, right? We're entering into a time of contradictions. We have equality in social and economic life, but we have equality in political life, inequality in social and economic life. And the conclusion he comes to is if you don't remedy the structure will blow itself up. Right? And so again, you go back to even you think of the contemporary, think of the New York and the Mamdani campaign. What is his point? His point is basically that if you don't have rent free apartments, you can't live in the city anymore. You can't live in the city anymore. How will you exercise your right to love? So of course, it's completely connected. So the idea that we got to deal with the current social and economic structure is fundamental, and the agreement on that particular point. Every other right is thinned down or attenuated if you can't deal with the fundamental question of the social and the economic structure. That being said, only one point I'll make, which is the other viewpoint, which is to say that that people you can't talk about the right to love now because people are more concerned about earning a livelihood. I think that's a fair enough point. I mean, there's no disagreement on the fact that we need to create conditions where people have better right to livelihood. But then you speak to the poorest people. I mean, in terms of the right to marry, right to same-sex marriage, not even right to same-sex marriage, right to marriage equality campaign. A lot of the folks were transgender people, and they're not in necessarily great socio-economic conditions. But they say this is very important in my personal life. I want to be able to marry the man I want to marry, right? And that's the right people feel they must have now, right? So I think it's important not to minimize how deeply and passionately people feel about the right to love, while at the same time it's important to take forward the question of the challenging the social economic structure which we currently have. So I'd say it's both.
I think with this we can end a wonderful discussion, and I hope we can take ahead this conversation forward. Even we can have an informal discussion over there. So we are moving next to our reading discussion. So yes, but before this I think in defending love, when we defend love, we don't only defend love. We defend the very spirit of our constitution. We defend equality, dignity, and liberty too. So I think may our love be radical. It is resistance, unyielding. And yes, thank you so much for your insightful perspectives on law, love, and resistance. And I do hope to take up this conversation forward. So we have the live going. So this video, the whole discussion will be available on Instagram too. So just in case you want to share it with people, I'll share the link ahead. So yes, now we are moving on to our next session, which is a reading discussion. It's like a more yes.